Good evening and welcome. I'm John Coatsworth, Provost of Columbia University, and on behalf of all of Columbia, colleagues, faculty, students, all of us, I would like to thank you for joining us tonight for our discussion on effective policies in poverty reduction beyond the Millennium Development Goals. This event is also being live streamed on the web, so a warm welcome to all of you watching online as well. Organized as a joint initiative of the European Commission, the United Nations Development Program, and Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, affectionately known locally as SIPA, and in partnership with DEVEX and the Global Association Masters in Development Practice, tonight's event is part of the Kapuscinski Development Lecture series. We are extremely honored to host the first of these lectures to be held outside of the European Union. The lecture series is named for Ryszard Kapuscinski, a Polish reporter and writer who died in 2007. Kapuscinski, whose books were translated into many languages, was often named the Third World Chronicler, or the Voice of the Poor, for his famous reportage and books describing developing countries on all continents. The lectures are organized jointly by the European Commission, the United Nations Development Program, and partner universities and development think tanks. You will learn more about these lectures from the first of our distinguished lineup of speakers, Andris Pilbags, Commissioner for Development of the European Commission. Following Andris, we will hear from Helen Clark, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program. As heads of state gather downtown for the high-level meetings of the UN General Assembly, our keynote speakers will share their thoughts and have a question and answer following on the post-2015 development agenda and effective anti-poverty strategies. The keynote speakers are Jose Antonio Ocampo, professor here at SIPA and director of the Economic and Political Development Concentration here at the school, and Esther Duflo, the Abdul Latif Shamil Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics at MIT. Tonight's moderator, Shihan Sultanoglu, UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States of the United Nations Development Program, will introduce Jose and Esther in a moment. I will now turn the microphone over to Andris, who will say a few words on behalf of the European Commission. Thank you all for coming.
Dear John, dear Helen, Professor Duflo, Professor Ocampo, Mrs. Meissner, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Commission, I would like to welcome you all to today's Kapuscinski Development Lecture. The Commission is proud to partner with the UNDP in organizing the Kapuscinski Lectures, which have gained, since their launch in 2009, an increasing popularity. Over 50 lectures now have been delivered. Just mentioned the last, it was delivered by Aung San Suu Kyi, who took part in the latest Kapuscinski Lecture on the 12th of September in Warsaw. With the introduction of live streaming last year, some thousands of people from the European Union and the world have been able to follow them. And I welcome the many people following us, hopefully, now via the live stream. Every Kapuscinski Development Lecture brings a lot of freshness to the table. This one will be definitely no exception. Not just we have two very distinguished speakers that will speak with very important issue actually related to this week event in New York. But it also is the first lecture outside the borders of the European Union. And that's why my special thanks go to the Columbia University School of International Public Affairs and to Professor Ocampo for hosting today's event. I would like also to welcome the fact that we are joined by Renee Meissner, the daughter of Ryszard Kapuscinski. Perhaps you can raise up. So, after whom these lectures are named. We really thank you because it's really a pleasure. I remember some time ago when I was in Warsaw, well, you also listen to lectures, so I think you can compare the quality that we have achieved. The purpose is basically Kapuscinski lectures have been providing students, civil society, the media with unique opportunity to learn and debate development issue of the day. I believe as the time raised, also the demands are all raising. Because I believe with the debate on post-2015 development agenda, the task is really to, not just to inform, but really to shape development thinking for the years to come. And that's why two eminent academics whose influential views are highly respected by the world's leading development practitioners, your views are very crucial and at the right time. I'm sure that the topic, effective policies in poverty reduction beyond the MDGs, are really thrilling. And there have been already some attempts to address this through high-level panel, but it will be interesting to hear from the professors how they see it. I would also be glad to say what the European Union is doing for development. I was asked it as well, and I believe that European Union provides threefold, I think, the impact in the poverty eradication. Now having more chance really to see different parts of the world, and also with rather particular biography, because I was born in the Soviet Union, I studied during the Soviet Union, I participated in gaining independence, and afterwards. I can clearly say that the models, society models that I have seen, at least for me, the best is that one, the European Union's model. Because it provides social floors. It is also, well, provides also for growth. We can always ask, is it good sufficient or not? But it definitely allows to get dignity in society. And I think that is something that we underestimate in the European Union, but I believe it is its achievement, and it's something that we could be proud of, but a lot of elements it's worth to promote also outside. Second, European Union provides for roughly to 60% of official development aid. Yes, we are below what we have. Aspiration was 0.7% of GNI, but it's close to 60%. And it's anti-aid. We work with the governments through budget supports that actually politically is very difficult to defend, and sometimes they are less visible. So we go against visibility in a lot of cases really to get sustainable change. And last but not least, it is the issue with policy coherence for development, because it's treaty obligation to follow it. You can go from two ends. Definitely you can go on impact assessment, seeing, as we are doing now, what it will make an impact on our development partners. But you can also go, and I think now it's unique chance, with post-2015 goals being formulated and targets being agreed, having a benchmark. Because today, basically, you could say, is it positive or negative impact? And it's very subjective would be, because you have not very clear benchmark. But I believe with this process that we are now, it's possibility also to achieve more level of policy coherence for development. So that's why I believe the European Union definitely has a very strong interest that the post-2015 development agenda focuses on a couple of issues that I believe are crucial. One is that this 1 billion that leaves extreme poverty. I think it's crucial that no one really suffers from not access to food or nutritious food, no access to drinks, lack of access to drinking water, lack of access to quality education, lack of access to elementary health care. But I believe it goes beyond, because its dignity doesn't end there. It is also job, it is also access to institutions, access to justice. And it is difficult really to spell it out. In the European Union, we have built the common position around 5 pillars that broadly is in line with what I have mentioned. But I believe in the high-level panel report that actually is, views of people representing different parts of the world, different experiences and different cultural backgrounds, I would say, comes to rather, in my opinion, good definition. Even it's called illustrative goals, but with targets and, well, with good proposals that it's worth at least to get noticed in the whole process that we are in now. Last but not least, what has changed in the, I think, in development landscape? I think in the previous time, when the issue was being of alleviation, the development cooperation was seen mostly from the input point of view, how much money you put into the system, and that was most important indicator. I believe is not much more higher demand from development cooperation. It goes more to the outcomes and outputs. And that brings to us to the, well, successful or less successful policies. I read, and it's, I think it was in Le Monde or Figaro, I don't remember, about youth unemployment in France. And the article claims that each government in France's history addressed this issue, and all have been unsuccessful. So that's how difficult it is actually to make a successful policy. But at the same time, definitely youth unemployment is something that societies can't ignore. So I believe that it's worth not to do any attempt to deal with the issues, but it's by far better to do it on the basis of scientific evidence. So, and I hope that today's event will help us, the broader audience, but also policymakers, to base our policies on more scientific evidence as is usually the case. Thank you very much.
Good to be here with EU Commissioner Andris Piebalgs, the two professors who are going to give the lecture this year, and on a subject of great importance to UNDP. But first, can I say that UNDP is very pleased to be a co-organiser of this Kapuscinski Lecture series with the European Commission. European Commission is a very strong and strategic partner of ours, working through Commissioner Piebalgs in many parts of the world, and also working with the European Commission's enlargement department, shall I say, on relations with the parts of Europe which are not at this point in the European Union for a range of reasons. And we've done a lot of work with the support of the Commission in the accession countries, and the countries which one day could be accession countries. So it's a very, very important partnership for us. In tonight's lectures, Professor Ocampo will provide some insights into the current status of the MDGs and where the next Global Development Agenda might go. And Professor Duflo will speak about what the MIT Poverty Action Lab observes is happening with poverty reduction. And as I said, both of these topics are very relevant to my organisation. Over the next 2 years and 3 months to the end of December 2015, we will be very focused on accelerating MDG progress, as a lot of the targets have not been met by rather a lot of countries. Despite what you see with global averages, averages don't speak for progress everywhere. But we're also very engaged in this debate about what next, and to have an informed debate about that, you have to have information about what has worked and what hasn't in the MDG process. A couple of weeks ago, in the presence of the UN Secretary General, we released a full report on a huge global consultation which the UN development system has been facilitating with the support of development partners around the world over roughly the last year. And the report is called "A Million Voices, the World We Want," because truly more than 1 million people, one way or another, took part in this global conversation. There were 88 national consultations, which actually engaged a lot of people, major consultations around big themes in development, and then a My World survey, which was available online but also offline people were able to input into it as well. And we made a very big effort to reach out beyond those who normally get to participate in a global policy debate to ensure, of course, that the voices of women were heard loudly, the voices of children and young people, voices of Indigenous people, people from the world's poorest and most marginalised communities, people with disabilities, people displaced, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual people. We really set out to say the UN wants to hear the voices of the world's people. And the fact that more than 1 million engaged shows, I believe, that there is an appetite and an interest for being part of these debates. Broadly speaking, in the feedback, people told us that they did not want the objectives of the MDGs to be dropped because of the unfinished business on these most basic benchmarks of development. Ending poverty, hunger, achieving full gender equality, improving health services, access to education for all. These are pretty important to the world's peoples. But the feedback also was, could world leaders actually be a little more ambitious and address both emerging issues, which weren't around in 2000 to the same extent, and some of the old challenges which weren't directly addressed in the MDGs. For example, when the MDGs were formulated, more than half of the world's peoples were living in rural areas. But we're heading by mid-century towards a world where 2/3 will live in cities. And it's very important that the next development framework engages not only on the issues of rural development and rural poverty, which remain very pressing, but also on how to create the sustainable and livable cities of the future. Then there was the area of energy, which wasn't directly addressed in the MDGs, but how to develop without access to energy. Very difficult. With more than 1 billion people lacking electricity, even in the form as basic as an electric light bulb, and nearly 40% of the world's people relying on traditional biomass for cooking their food or heating their homes, and that often has health implications. There's also a deep sense in all the feedback about what the next agenda should look like, that the world as it is very unfair, marginalises many people, communities, whole countries, and people do want these inequalities addressed, whether they're between men and women, rural and urban, ethnic and religious groups, rich and poor, or on many other dimensions. Also coming through is a desire to see decent work and jobs at the very heart of the global agenda. So many people are excluded from the opportunity to earn a living wage or livelihood, particularly young people, and this is very dangerous and destabilising for societies around the world. Coming through too has been this very high priority to have honest and responsive governments which will engage with citizens and deliver decent services. In fact, you could feel coming through the feedback that people aren't very happy with their governments. They do want to see better performance, and they want more accountability. And then running through the feedback, sustainable development, recognising that growth at any price can be environmentally destructive and bring few social benefits, was also highlighted. So at UNDP, we are advocating that the 1 million voices should be heard, should be responded to, with a new development agenda which will generate genuine and widespread public ownership. Not an imposed agenda, but one that does respond to the voices of the world's people. And we think with that degree of public ownership, you could accelerate action on and get greater commitment to the next development agenda. But the next development agenda, as I said, should be informed by what has been, what works, and that helps the design of what could be. And it is to Professor Ocampo and Professor Duflo that we look tonight for fresh insights into that design challenge. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner, professors, dear Columbia students. I have been tasked with introducing two speakers who, of course, need no introduction. We are extremely lucky on this occasion to have two highly distinguished speakers who have both contributed research and thinking on international development and poverty. I feel particularly pleased as a former graduate of SIPA myself. It's really a great pleasure to be here and to see all the interest of the youth, the young people on development, on poverty reduction, on the international goals and priorities that we all have our hearts on. Professor Jose Antonio Ocampo is, as you know, professor of professional practice and Director of Economic and Political Development Concentration at Columbia University. To us in the United Nations, however, he is fondly remembered as United Nations Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, and before that as Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. He also has a distinguished background in his home country, Colombia, as Minister of Finance and Public Credit, Chairman of the Central Bank, Director, Minister of Planning, and Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, as well as Executive Director of FEDESarroyo. Professor Ocampo has contributed enormously to the dialogue on development economics, having published extensively on macroeconomic theory and policy, international financial issues, economic and social development, international trade, and Colombian and Latin American economic history. He has received a number of personal honors and distinctions, including the 2008 Leontiev Prize for Advancing the Frontiers of Economic Thought and the 1988 Alejandro Ángel Escobar National Science Award of Colombia. Professor Esther Duflo is known to us all as the Abdul Latif Jamil Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics in the Department of Economics at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She founded and directs the Jamil Poverty Action Lab, known as JPAL. Her research, which has been groundbreaking, focuses on macroeconomic issues in developing countries, including household behavior, education, access to finance, health, and policy evaluation. Professor Duflo is the co-author of the bestseller book, Poor Economics, a radical rethinking of the way to fight global poverty. The book, for which she received the Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year Award, together with Abhijit Banerjee. Professor Duflo is also a member of the President Barack Obama's Global Development Council. She serves as the founding editor of the American Economic Journal, Applied Economics. I'm sure you will find the lectures most stimulating and inspiring, and of course I'm sure you will enjoy them tremendously. I must apologize that regretfully, unlike what the Provost has announced, I will not be able to moderate the discussion. As you know, it's the UN General Assembly, and I have to go back for some unfinished business. My apologies for that, but my colleague Jan, who is the coordinator of the Kapuscinski Lectures, will have the pleasure of moderating the discussion after the Kapuscinski Lectures tonight in New York City at Columbia University. So thank you very much, and once again, enjoy the lectures.
By thanking Shihan for her very warm presentation, thanking the Commissioner, the UNDP Administrator, and of course the European Commission and UNDP for inviting me to deliver this lecture today with the pleasant company of Professor Duflo. So let me thank all of them for this invitation, and I'm going to focus on the broader issues associated with the design of the post-2015 agenda. You say it's very macro issues. I think that will make an interesting complement to the focus that Professor Duflo has on some of these development issues. I am, of course, involved in these debates quite deeply. I was invited to be made part of the UN task force that presented a report last year, and I'm head myself of the ECOSOC Committee for Development Policy, which is I would say, the main expert committee of ECOSOC, which, of course, is working exactly on these issues, and presented this year some recommendations to which I will refer here. So let me start with some background for those of you that may not be familiar with some of the elements of this process. And let me start by saying that one of the great success stories of the United Nations has been its capacity to serve as the forum to agree on major global development goals. This is a long history that in particular goes to the so-called UN Development Decades, launched in the 1960s under the proposal of President Kennedy, actually, as well as the series of global conferences and summits that were convened, let's say, first in the 1970s and 1980s as conferences, and then as summits of heads of state, starting with the UN Summit of Children in 1990, which I broadly think is part of the post-Berlin World Order. And part of that is what came to be reflected in the Millennium Development Goals, let's say, implemented after the Millennium Declaration of 2000. And as part of that, of the current process, there are two parallel tracks, let's say, underway. The first one is the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which is a mandate of last year's Rio +20, of the Conference on Sustainable Development, that said that there has to be a formal process of defining a set of goals, which they call the Sustainable Development Goals. And then the post-2015 agenda, which I will refer more closely here. And one of the characteristics of this process, and a big difference, as I will point out with the MDGs, is the highly participatory character of this process, which involves not only nation states that are members of the United Nations, but lots of civil society. This global conversation to which the UNDP administrator referred to. So for this process, there are two reports on the table, two major reports on the table, the one of the UN task force that was presented last year, and the high-level panel that was convened under the leadership of the presidents of Liberia, Indonesia, and the British Prime Minister, which was presented to the Secretary General in May of this year. And there are three additional documents which are also very important. Let's say the report of the Secretary General to the General Assembly event that will take place actually the following days, which is the first formal discussion of the post-2015 agenda. The contribution of the UN Regional Commissions that was presented also this year, and very interesting, again, what the UNDP administrator referred to, which is this report of the United Nations Development Group on the global conversation on the post-2015 agenda. Now, the MDGs, as you well know, are 8 specific goals. I'm going to, focus on some of them, but let me emphasize the first one, the eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, And the last one, which I will refer to with some details in my presentation, but they also include the universal primary education, some elements of gender equality, health, maternal mortality and child mortality, and some environmental issues. Now, the starting point for the design of this post-2015 agenda has to be an analysis of what happened with the MDGs, and all the reports that are on the table do reflect on the experience of the MDGs. So let me focus both on the pros and the cons of the MDGs. The first pro is is the fact that there was a concise set of goals which were clearly measurable and human development oriented. They had a very high level of visibility, which was facilitated their use as an advocacy tool, but also in many developing countries also as an instrument for the design of development policies. This is a particular work that UNDP was at the front of in terms of trying to bring this down to the national level, which is very different from many other experiences in terms of development goals. They were strongly backed by the Bretton Woods Institution, the official development assistance community, and numerous civil society organizations. In fact, some of the important resistance that existed by some countries, notably the United States, to the MDGs was finally overcome in 2005 when the then President Bush said that the U.S. was committed also to the Millennium Development Goals, which was, of course, a welcome, although a bit late, recognition of the importance of these goals. And for this recognition, I think, reflects the fact that the UN is and can be widely used as the most representative and open forum in the world as the adequate place to define development goals. And very importantly, because I will refer to this in detail also in my presentation, they represent a significant improvement in monitoring of UN goals, which is a major problem, as I will point out later on. So there was a system of information built around the United Nations of the different agencies in charge of following up on each of the specific targets set for the Millennium Development Goals. It's an unprecedented system with highly visible reports by the United Nations, as well as the World Bank and many other civil society organizations. Now, what were the negative elements of the MDGs? First of all, it was a highly centralized process of defining goals and targets. It was not a participatory process as the current one, which of course will make the current process a bit more complex in terms of defining the goals, but at the same time, it has the possibility of generating a broader set of consensus and to be legitimately goals that are designed from below, let's say. They were also viewed as donor-centric. I mean, developing countries in particular saw the goals as extremely donor-centric, and for the fourth, they saw this strong weakness in the so-called Global Partnership for Development, that is the 8th MDG, and therefore trying to overcome the problems associated with that is very important for the next generation of goals. There was no economic issues in the MDGs. And this is important, as I will point out. In 2005, actually, as under Secretary General and with the Director General of the International Labour Organization, we were able to push for productive and decent employment to be included in the MDGs. But unfortunately, in the way this was defined, it was, although they were formally adopted by UN member states in the 2005 summit, it was only included as a target within the MDG 1 rather than as a goal in itself, which is what we had hoped so. They were clearly incomplete targets in many areas, and in particular in terms of gender equality and environment, which are two areas which have been widely criticized as being too narrow in the sort of targets that were set. And finally, for middle-income countries in particular, they always complained that the targets were drafted, even the goals were drafted in such a way that they were not significantly meaningful for them. For example, all the discussions in Latin America, which I had to lead at different times, they always said, well, many of these goals are not relevant for Latin America because they are really targets for low-income countries, not for middle-income countries. And in a sense, the essence of this is they have to be a global, a universal agenda. So in the discussion on the table, let me start with the visions that have been proposed both by the UN Task Force and the high-level panel. The UN Task Force presented in its report last year the idea that the vision that should be adopted by the United Nations should be based on three fundamental principles: human rights, equality, and sustainability. And sustainability understood in the sense of in the United Nations sense of being it says an integrated development encompassing the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of development. The high-level panel, and I quote, states that our vision and our responsibility is to end extreme poverty in all its forms in the context of sustainable development. Now, the vision proposed by the UN, in a sense, I consider myself to be broader in two different senses, and I think it's a more appropriate context to start the discussion. The first because it adopts something that is very dear to the United Nations family, which is the human rights-based approach to development. So, to anchor the development goals in human rights principles, in the rights of citizens to certain fundamental issues. And second, it places inequality at the center, and not only extreme poverty. This is, as I will point out, very important, both because rising inequality is one of the most troublesome international trends, but also because in many senses, extreme poverty is one of the manifestations of inequality. So it's important to, let's say, to fight the bigger war on this issue, which is the war against inequality. And in that sense, take the poverty goals as part of a broader family of goals to eradicate extreme poverty, extreme forms of inequality. Now, within that discussion, I would say that there are, four fundamental agreements, let's say, and the two reports really coincide on this. The first one is that the agenda has to encompass the three dimensions of sustainable development, so economic, social, and environmental. The second and very important difference with the MDGs is that it should be a universal agenda. There is an agenda that is applicable to developed as well as to developing countries. And this is very important. Some of the goals in development should be equally applicable to developed countries. For example, we can think of domestic employment and inequality goals that should be equally applicable to developed countries, given the fact that the tendency to rising inequality is equally important for many developing countries, say the United States. According to the, let's say, recent information, the median income has remained stagnant for 25 years. I mean, that's and most of the rise in the aggregate income has gone to the top 1% of the population. That's a significant rise in inequality, which it should be an equal concern as a member of the United Nations if inequality goals are adopted in the post-2015 agenda. So from the point of view of the developed countries, I would say that the goals both aim at trying to gather the commitment of those countries to support developing countries in their fight in the development area, but also their own development in issues such as universal access to social services, or to the reduction of inequality, of to decent and productive employment for all. Let's say, so I think this is a big and important difference that has been highlighted in the discussions. The third is that it is important to leave ample space for national policy design. So the goals and the targets should not try to eliminate the very important national strategies, which had to be, let's say, under the umbrella of the post-2015 agenda, but that, that will lead to very specific targets at the country level. And this is very important, as the discussion said, for the ownership of the strategies aimed at achieving these goals in the post-2015 world. And finally, very importantly, that the goals should be a few, and using the terminology high-level panel, bold but practical, but equally measurable, so that there can be a strong monitoring system to follow them. Now, having said that and said both the elements of the vision as well as these four very important agreements, let me mention 5 areas, and I will focus on 4 of them in my presentation. The first one is the issue of the Global Partnership for Development, what it means, and particularly what it implies. And I will emphasize that it has to include some goals in terms of economic development of countries. There is an issue that was entirely absent in the MDGs. The second is the importance of domestic inequalities, which you can say is a major emerging trend. I would say is one of the most, or the most important emerging trend that has to be managed by the new set of goals. A third one, on which I will not make a presentation because it's less related to the issue of poverty, is how to share in the cost of moving towards sustainable patterns of consumption and production, which is the main issue that is set in, again, in both documents as the major objective of environmental sustainability. The fourth issue is the role of peace and good domestic governance in the agenda. 2 issues on which both reports are quite strong. And finally, and very importantly, this is in a sense one of my obsessions with the UN goals, is what is the monitoring and accountability for the commitments that are adopted in the United Nations. So let me start with the first of this issue, the Global Partnership for Development. And I will start by stating in very strong terms that inequalities of income per capita across countries explains about 3/4 of global inequality. So if you want to attack poverty, you have to start by recognizing that the major determinant of global poverty is where people are born. And then support those countries where people are born poor and where people are condemned to poverty as the major objective of international cooperation. That, of course, has many human development dimensions, and the MDGs were very clear and good at identifying some of them, but there are many economic development dimensions that are crucial in that regard. In fact, global economic growth is one of the essential elements in the fight against global poverty. And this requires many issues associated to economic development, but let me emphasize that the most important for me is how you facilitate the process of a structural change of countries, which in the case of low-income countries is mostly how they move out of primary commodities into industrialization and modern services, and in the case of middle-income countries is how you move into be a source of technology generation. And when you fail to do that, you get into what are generally known as either the low-income traps or the middle-income traps, both of which can be a significant obstacle to the advancement of countries. So this, let's say this figure taken from Branko Milanovic, the #1 expert of the World Bank, let's say on inequality issues, shows this, the importance of international equality. Here's on top the Gini estimated by him for, let's say, for global citizens. This is Global Inequality Index, let's say, and the second one is inequality in the level of incomes per capita of countries. And as you can say, the long-term increase in inequality among countries, which is the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, and part of the post-Second World era, was the main driver of increased international inequality. And today, although that international equality is falling, has been falling, let's say, for some time, particularly the last 2 decades, still, at the end, it explains around 3/4 of global inequality. So fighting international inequality cesses. And this is the major determinant of this other, which is what Milanovic called the global pyramid, which is how income is distributed in the world. So this is how he distributes by quintiles, so 25% of global income. And what he finds is that the 1.75% richest people make as much money as the 70% poorest people of the world. So reducing that international inequality is the first element, in my view, that has to be taken into account in any strategy to reduce global poverty. Now, the high-level panel for this purpose proposes really what is a set of multi-stakeholder partnerships. That is, partnerships between government, civil society, the private sector, foundations, academia. I would say those are important, and I will say they are important for this following issue that I'm going to address. But taking into account, let's say, my long tradition of being part of the debate on behalf of developing countries of this, that's a wrong conception of what a global partnership for development is. A global partnership for development is, above all, an intergovernmental cooperation system by which countries in the United Nations agree to cooperate to reduce global inequalities. And for that purpose, the multi-stakeholder partnerships can be part of the process, and I'll mention them again, but they cannot be at the center of the agenda. What has to be at the center of the agenda, in my view, and what developing countries are bringing into the table now, is, of course, the issue of the global rules by which the international economy is organized, and particularly in the areas of finance, of trade, and very importantly today, of technology generation and transfer. So the central issues here is, how you finance developing countries, what are the mechanisms, what are the imperfections of the current mechanisms. For example, the clear undercapitalization of the World Bank because of the decision of its major stakeholder not to capitalize it further, but at the same time unwilling to reduce its share in the bank, which means that the World Bank is condemned to a stagnant capital and therefore a stagnant capacity to lend in the future. The issue of trade, which is the unfulfilled promise to allow, for example, LDCs, least developed countries, to have full access to the markets of developed countries. You can even say that they should be increasingly have a preferential access to the markets of developing countries, so the middle-income countries in particular. And the issue of how you facilitate the transfer of technology, which is now being made extremely costly by the protection of intellectual property rights. And this is a major problem. For example, you look, many of the critics of the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the US is proposing is that it's essentially about protecting intellectual property rights, further than what has been achieved so far, which is not quite a development-friendly attitude. In contrast to that, the issue of how you make a technology freely accessible for certain purposes, which may be from medicines to environment, it really has to be a central issue in the international discussion on development. And very importantly, of course, given that this issue has been recognized, particularly in the Monterrey Conference on Financing for Development, that this international governance has to be broadened and strengthened, strengthen the participation of developing countries in international economic decision-making and norm setting, which is the exact wording of the Monterrey Consensus. The second issue is the domestic inequalities. So I will start by underscoring that the most important emerging trend is probably, the last decades, is probably the rise of domestic income inequalities in both developed and developing countries. Furthermore, for high and middle income countries, and particularly for high middle income countries, poverty is essentially an issue of inequality. I mean, the United States is a country that should not have poor people. Period. It's just a question of income inequality that explains why the United States has poor people. But that's equally true of my country, Colombia. I mean, Colombia has a level of income which can eradicate, forms of extreme poverty. So the existence of extreme poverty in a country like mine is equally determined by income inequality. So income inequality is, in fact, it should be taken as the major issue of poverty in many countries of the world. This is probably not true, or it's not true of many low-income countries, where there is an additional issue of the level of development of those countries. Gender, of course, inequality, of course, cut across many other dimensions, notably gender and ethnicity. This is our major issue that have to be addressed, and on which I will say the reports on the table are quite good, much better certainly than the MDGs in the area of gender equality. But reducing income inequality should be a major goal in the post-2015 agenda. This is what, by the way, my committee, the ECOSOC Committee for Development Policy, has already proposed explicitly as one of the issues that has to be at the center of the post-2015 agenda. And we are, of course, accompanied by a good set of civil society organizations that have equally put this issue on the table. The high-level panel says that this should not be so because this should be a national goal, not a global policy goal, due to the very huge and the large differences across the world in the views of what is an acceptable level of income inequality. That criteria is totally wrong for defining a global goal, because if you follow that principle across, you cannot agree on most issues. Because you can say, yes, this is equally true of education, equally true of health, it's equally true of environmental issues. It's crucial in terms of domestic governance, for example. So if you follow that principle, you can actually hardly agree of any international goals. So I think that argument is entirely misplaced. So one of the inconsistencies that I find of the high-level panel is why they put the issue of inequality so much at the center. If they refer to gender, for example, if they refer to ethnic groups, but they totally say that it should not be extensive to income inequality. And this is just to underscore how important this issue is. I mean, these are graphs based on data from Andrea Cornea, the former head of the United Nations University Institute for Development and Economic Research, in which you see that in red, what are the proportion of the people of the world that live in countries where income inequality has been increasing. So you said in the last 3-4 decades of the 20th century, 3/4 of the world live in, people in the world live in countries where income inequality was increasing. You know, you see by levels of countries, I mean, the transitional economies that Sheehan has under her purview is actually the worst case, but also developed countries in the bottom. And actually the proportion of people who live, the green people who live in countries where income inequality decrease is extremely small. Now the situation improved somewhat in the first decade of the 21st century, but equally, 60% of the people of the world continue to live in countries where income inequality further deteriorated in the beginning of the 21st century, and also the portion where it improved actually started to increase. But overall, you can say that something like 3/4 of the world lives in countries with this problem. So this is a really major international development issue, rising income inequality. What can you do about this? And both documents use the concept of inclusive development. You ask me what are the major issues of inclusive development, I will underscore 4 of them. Productive employment, universal social services, a redesigned care economy, which is essential for gender equality also, but can also have many issues, many effects, let's say, on broader issues of equality, and redistributive fiscal policy. So I think these are 4 central elements of any agenda of inclusive development. And for many of these, I would say that's where the multi-stakeholder processes and social innovations can play a role. Certainly productive employment in universal social services and in the care economy. But let me underscore that this has to be done under broader state-led policy frameworks. So yeah, multi-stakeholder processes are good, but they should be operate under the leadership of governments, which facilitate, let's say, those processes. I just underscore 2 of these issues, which is the relation between inequality and social services. This is for developed countries, actually. I could present a similar graph, actually, for Latin America, which I haven't studied, which is the relation between income inequality in the vertical axis and social spending on the horizontal axis. So the less you do social spending, the more unequal societies are. So you have, on top you have the US, Australia, and Switzerland, which are among the developed countries the most unequal societies. And to underscore the importance of fiscal redistribution, this is a comparison of the Gini coefficient of Latin America versus the average of the OECD developed countries. And I can see that the big differences in post-tax inequality, let's say, which are the green bars, is associated in part to the initial inequality, let's say before fiscal spending, but much more to social spending, which is the green, and the tax redistribution, which is the orange. So with the developed countries are more equal than Latin America, essentially because they have very redistributive fiscal policy. So without redistributive fiscal policy, you can hardly have more equal societies. So on peace and good governance, let me say that I agree with the statement by the high-level panel, and I quote them, that the peace and good governance are core elements of well-being, not optional extras. However, and peace is actually particularly important because there is overwhelming evidence that conflicts under conflict are most the countries that have the less or the least advanced in terms of economic and social development. So eliminating conflict is an important element in development, more broadly speaking. Now, the crucial issues here in relation to the first of these topics is what are the contours of the development agenda as opposed to the broader United Nations agenda, which of course has peace at the center. I mean, it's one of the 3 building blocks of the United Nations: peace, human rights, and development. So for that reason, I think the post-2015 agenda has to deal with the linkages, let's say, between peace and security and the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. And I think the 3 dimensions are important because there is increasing evidence that the issues of conflict over environmental resources and outcomes is an important development issue worldwide. Now, on the issue of good governance, let me say that I find it, that it does not meet the criteria of having measurable targets. All measurable targets on this area are highly controversial, including in particular those developed by the World Bank, which are the most widely used. So I see no way of defining concrete measurable targets in the area of good governance. So yes, good governance should be a part of the overarching framework of the post-2015 agenda, but much as human rights is. It's also, again, very difficult and actually easier to define targets for human rights than for good governance that are agreeable internationally. So in that regard, let me say that good governance should be a framework, and as well as the protection of human rights, but and very importantly, include not only national good governance, but what developing countries have always underscored, equally good international governance, global governance. Finally, on the fourth issue that I want to reflect, which is the issue of monitoring accountability. This is quite an important issue for any future development agenda of the United Nations. Because the greatest weakness of the United Nations is incapacity to monitor and be accountable for the commitments made by countries in the area of development. So you can say that there is essentially no accountability for international commitments in the United Nations. So yes, the UN serves as a fantastic framework for agreeing on goals, but at the same time, it's a very poor framework, has proven to be a poor framework in the past to make countries accountable for the goals. The MDGs were an advance in monitoring. So as I pointed out, there's an information system. There are regular reports that point out where we are making advance, where we're not, trying to push for actions to accelerate advance where we are lagging behind. But this is only the starting point. I think the post-2015 agenda has to go a bit further than that. In fact, the high-level panel mentioned the term data revolution because in many of these goals and targets, you have to have a really great innovation in trying to have uniform measures that that can be, let's say, you have data for all the countries in the world. Now, I think given the nature of these processes, it is probably true that most goals and targets should be monitored through that system, but not legally binding. However, I think we have to go, at least in some cases, beyond that. And that, I think, can be achieved by, what I would prefer, which I push actually, when I was in the United Nations, is to adopt some systems of peer reviews, similar to the OECD peer review processes for the UN goals. Now, that is, has been difficult to implement, and the most have been these voluntary presentations, which are now made to the Economic and Social Council of the UN. But I would say that aside from the very high level of visibility of the monitoring instruments, the reports of the United Nations, of the World Bank, for example, on the MDGs, you need evaluations at the high political level, so you have to bring very high level political presence to evaluate progress and lags in progress. But in some cases, at least, I think you need a clear system of accountability. And I will underscore particularly the 0% ODA target as one particular case in which the European Union has been responsive in the past, now is lagging behind, but the rest of the developed world have not. And I think this should be a very specific area in which actually it should be a very explicit commitment subject to a strong accountability. And there are probably other areas I will underscore in which that should be so. And finally, the Economic and Social Council has been given the task of following up on the United Nations goal, and I think there is a good opportunity to actually renovate, to change the ECOSOC system to fulfill that goal, that objective. And when I say the ECOSOC system is because ECOSOC, for those of you who don't know it, aside from the Economic and Social Council, which is what they said, the upper level body, the main body, one of the main bodies of the United Nations, has a system of commissions that do the follow-up on, for example, the Commission on the Status of Women, which is one of the ECOSOC commissions, or the Commission on Population, or the Commission, or the All Commission on Sustainable Development, now abolished, or the Forum on the Indigenous Peoples, indigenous issues, excuse me, are all very particular forum that can, do a significant follow-up of commitments of the United Nations in those areas. So I think this could be a good starting point, not only to have a strong monitoring of the specific goals that will make up the post-2015 agenda, but also the broader goals of the United Nations summits and conferences that are on the purview of these specific commissions of the ECOSOC system. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
It's truly a great pleasure, great honor to be here. First of all, because even though I feel somewhat sheepish to say that in presence of his daughter, Kapuscinski is one of my favorite authors, not only for the reporting, but mostly, I think, for some of the deep ideas that he had about things ranging from political economy, what makes dictators get confused in what they are doing, the sort of things in which they are stumbling, and the life of the poor and the way these two things intersect. And it's really, having been fed with this book for many years now, I didn't really expect that I would get to give a lecture which has his name on it, and it's truly humbling and a pleasure. Secondly, it's a pleasure to be here in New York and talk about this subject in the context of the UN General Assembly and CGI meetings and all of the, let's say, tamasha that is going around the question of poverty and international assistance at the moment. And it sort of gives me a good opportunity and a bully pulpit to discuss some ideas that I've had about how to think about the role of international assistance in today's world in the process of helping the fight against poverty. I should start with a big disclaimer, since my role in the Global Development Council was mentioned. I'm speaking on behalf of me, and that's it. So this has nothing to do with the Global Development Council, which might be horrified if they heard me, although I hope not. So what I'm talking about today is really a set of new ideas which may not be entirely formulated. Maybe it's a bit risky, but you have to give a new lecture sometimes. So the discourse on aid is very polarized. On this side of New York, I guess you have a more pro-aid discourse. Foreign aid can and eradicate poverty. It's a question of levels. It's a question of political will. To some extent, processes such as the MDGs have helped in fostering some amount of this political will, but it's not enough. And countries don't meet their ODA targets. The ODA targets might not be enough in themselves. and there is a possibility of getting rid of poverty, not only extreme poverty, but more than that, and the ills associated with it, if only we had the political will to do that here in our rich countries. And then we have 8 pessimists, which are more toward the south of New York, saying that foreign aid is useless at best, probably worse than useless, because it kind of moves countries in one direction, then the other prevents them to follow their own path towards development, growth, which ultimately is the only way to reduce poverty. Usually a corollary to this view is that free markets are an essential part of this process of growth and development, and only they can eradicate poverty, usually with this is viewed in some combination with free political systems. So it's not particularly surprising that you've got these very stark views and very charismatic people associated with both of these views, because global poverty, in particular when we think about extreme poverty, is a topic which people either ignore or treat it in an extremely emotional way. You don't really easily have a half ground for good reasons. Because when you start thinking for 5 minutes about what it is to live under $1 a day, what it is to live in a place where infant mortality is what it is, where 25 million kids don't get immunized every year when we have the vaccines, when people have no easy access to water, and when you start imagining those lives, then you kind of want a problem to go away. So one way is to just stop thinking about it. Another way is to look for solutions that are a little bit, that make bold promises in terms of what can go away. So there is a very strong discourse for a popular discourse on poverty that both has scientific legitimacy, so that it can go with the credibility that people need, and has strong policy prescriptions and some hope that we're going to get rid of it. And complexity and moving slowly and trying this and that, and it doesn't really easily have a place in the impatience that the problem of global poverty quite naturally provokes. The only problem is that those conclusions about what you can do or what you cannot do are drawn naturally from the experiences of comparing the experiences of different countries with markets or with aid or what have you, or with so you said that you can see that countries with more malaria cases are significantly poorer. So that should imply you should spend money on bed nets or other way we might know to eradicate poverty, to eradicate malaria, and it's going to go a long way towards eradicating poverty. On the other hand, you could say, well, so much money was put into Africa, and Africa is still poor. What's going on? That's really such a huge waste. When is the inquiry of foreign aid ever going to stop, etc., etc.? And I said neither of these statements make all that much sense, because the countries that have a lot of malaria have a lot of other problems, including the fact that malaria is something that can be addressed. Maybe harder now that DDT can't really be used, but some countries have addressed malaria and others haven't. And that has come from, at some point in life, Sri Lanka, Paraguay, the south of the US, most of Latin America was organized enough to get rid of malaria. And Uganda, part of India, Bangladesh, etc., were not. And that's, there's some geographical constraint, there is a lot of political constraint, there is a lot of misorganization that might have been in these countries. It's very hard to believe that this is not correlated with other things they haven't done, on the health as well, or on other aspects of economic policies that would lead to development and growth. So that's for just this one example. That doesn't mean that malaria doesn't affect poverty. We also know that from other examples. It just means that these country-by-country comparisons are very difficult to read. On the other side, of course, looking at Africa, well, Africa is getting richer now. Maybe it's the result of all the aid that was poured before, who knows. Secondly, we have no idea what would have happened without the aid. Maybe Africa would be richer, for all we know. Maybe it would be poorer. We just don't have a counterfactual. So these kind of discourses that kind of make this broad sweeping statement based on broad sweeping look at the world, I think have, when you start digging deeper in them, little content. Which might mean that, oh, it is a bit kind of hopeless. We're never going to find a solution easily and be able to apply it. But of course, that's not the answer that I want to draw. What I want to draw is the conclusion that we need to go back to an objective that's much more modest than let's get rid of poverty in this very broad sense. Although I do believe that an objective of not having anybody living under $1 a day by 2030 is feasible. But it's not going to go away. Poverty is not going to go away with one magic bullet. It's going to go away, and it's going to, we're going to make progress against it, and progress against all the manifestation of what it is to be poor. With a series of steps which will help us identify ways to significantly improve the lives of the poor in all of these dimensions. And I think the role of, the way I see my role as an academic working on poverty is to guide policy in a process of creative experimentation, which is identify the best way to fight these ills. And here's one quote that I like by Roosevelt. He was talking during the crisis following the 1929 huge crisis. The country needs, and unless I mistake its temper, the country demands bold, persistent experimentation. It is common sense to try a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another, but above all, try something. And I think that's a good approach to have. I think the fight against poverty is a response to a permanent crisis. It's a crisis that's not going to go away, that has a level of urgency and importance than the crisis that Roosevelt was talking about. And therefore, we need to be imaginative and creative and experimental in response to it. But unfortunately, policy often lacks imagination, precisely where it needs it, where we need to try things out. That's not only a problem of developing countries. As pointed out, it's not that we've solved our problem of youth unemployment. We need to continue trying things out and failing until we find something that actually succeeds. But whereas I think social policy needs imagination, try things out of the box all the time, the policymakers really lack imagination. Maybe not the policymakers themselves, but the constraint they face means that the policies they implement tend to lack imagination because the policymakers are easily prisoners of the ambition to promise a lot, because they need to be elected, to promise to solve the problem all at once, to say that they have the solution, and therefore once they have it, they have to implement it broad scale everywhere immediately, and that's going to solve the problem. That's not only a problem of aid, although it is a problem of aid, who tends to just go jump from one fad to the next with record speed and no really judgment about what has happened in the past. But if it was just a problem of aid, frankly, it would be somewhat irrelevant. However much we argue about how aid is important, it's quantitatively very small relative to the policies that countries, the money that poor countries spend on their own citizens. But developing country government behave very much the same way, not because they are bad governments necessarily, but because they face the same constraints. So I think it's possible to guide policy, and I think it's possible to move this equilibrium a little bit, out of this equilibrium a little bit, and that's my hope in the work I'm doing, towards a culture of learnings and experimentation. So towards the learning of trying new things. So many people make a lot of suggestions. So identifying those suggestions might be a way. Then you can rigorously evaluate those suggestions through systematic investigations. Then be tolerant of failure, but failing fast. a big problem in social policy is inertia, which is when something has managed to make it into the agenda, it's someone's job to run this policy, and it's not going to go away for some time, and that's a little bit of a problem. And I think aid, which is otherwise somewhat at risk of becoming a little bit irrelevant, however hard it is to believe in New York this week, can play a role in funding countries to do such experimentation, which I think would save it from irrelevance. So traditionally, the role that we see of international assistance, bilateral aid, multilateral agencies, etc., is to fill some gaps. So, there is countries need bridges. They don't have enough money to build bridges, so we're going to go and build them a bridge. So this is a financing gap in investment. So at the beginning of the whole idea that rich countries should help poor countries was really literally bridges and dams and stuff like that. And then it moved to human capital investments. Sometimes it's coming back to bridges and dams, but that's sort of the same idea. So you do stuff. And if you go to what USAID is doing, mainly they are doing stuff. They are like engaging contractors to build schools in Tanzania or wherever countries they're working in. And for some countries it makes sense. Countries are poor, and a small country like, say, Malawi, poor and small, because of the weird thing that aid is not really proportional to population fully. Aid is a big part of the budget. So that makes sense in a sense. But when country is a small part of the budget, which is true for most of the countries, because on average, international aid is 13% of the budget of the poor countries, which is not that large. Money, that's in Africa, by the way. So in India, it's nothing. And India has a lot of poor countries. Money is fungible. So if you put some investment somewhere, then you would expect that the money would be taken out and put somewhere else, and that it would not really affect the way the budget is spent overall. So at least with budget support, like the European Union is doing, there is some, at least we've agreed, like we've abandoned the idea of making them build schools, except to the extent that there can be a conversation about, oh, this is what you could do with the money. But if you build 100 schools in Tanzania, presumably it's 100 schools that, if they had been built, the money has moved elsewhere. Money is fungible. More investments, that's basic, like economics 101, more investments would reduce the returns to further public and private investment in the same domain, and therefore displace them. That argument would not apply in aid where aid is an important part of the budget. So in a sense, it might have been less relevant in the 1960s when Kennedy was putting in place the aid infrastructure, which is the one we have lived with in the US anyway for several decades. But now the share of aid in developing countries is not that large, and it's declining because these countries become richer. And some middle-income countries, erstwhile middle-income countries like Brazil, start playing an important role, and they have different objectives in mind. So without a change in mindset from providing stuff, being bridges or schools, to providing something different, I think what's going to happen is aid is going to become irrelevant. Not today, not tomorrow, but pretty soon. Some people might say very good, but you can also say, well, let's try whether we can do better. And my proposal is that it becomes the venture capitalist of development innovation. So let's step back and think about venture capital. I think one key gap in financing for development policy is something akin to venture capital. The risk capital that can finance investment in new technology and new policy approaches, very importantly. It's not only about gadgets. I'm not talking about cell phones or vaccines even. I'm talking about a better way of organizing a primary school system so that it delivers learning or another Millennium Development Goals. So people who think about innovation typically think of innovation in 3 stages. There is a first stage of basic research, very risky, potentially interesting. Then there is a second step which take the promising concept, say a new molecule, to make the innovation market ready. So this is the stage 4 medical trials. You really have to try it on people. It's expensive. It's large scale, it's kind of boring, but it really needs to be done. And then there is a third step, which is, okay, you've gone through the medical trial, it's working, or you've gone through all the testing for your new phone system, it's working, then you need to be ready for scale-up and diffusion. For things that have a market, the venture capital steps in by financing stage 1 and 2 and providing plenty of technical support and advice and mentoring and all that to entrepreneurs that have an idea at stage 1 to shepherd it through those levels with the hope of making money in stage 3 for some innovation, whatever small fraction it supports. But they fully recognize the risk, and they'll make money on something, then fail on the other one, and life continues as such. But this all hinges on having a market at the end for some of this innovation to make the money back on what the efforts were before. And such venture capital is lacking in the development sector. Sometimes it's lacking, even though potentially there could be a market eventually. Because the market is, because of a failure of information, for example, people don't know that this would be eventually profitable to kind of have a new filter for clean water, whatever example you want to think of. Companies don't know, don't realize that, but someone creative could see it. Or sometimes it's just so much risk that there's no appetite to take this over when you could do things like safer things, like developing new, or supporting the development of new apps. So this is a place where I think it's been recognized for a while, and you have organizations like Acumen Fund here in New York, or some foundations like the Media Foundation are working in this space, which are trying to fill that gap. So identify where there are money-making opportunities down the line and helping people get to that stage with accepting a fair amount of risk in the process. So that's great. The problem is, that's a small part of the socially valuable innovation. Many socially valuable innovations are not going to have a market. I'll take you an example. Deworming pills, you give people deworming pills when they are in school. The returns to that in terms of their, the internal rate of return of that in terms of when you compare the wages they are getting when they are 20 compared to the cost of deworming, all the cost of deworming, including the opportunity cost of the fact that they stay in school longer, the internal rate of return to that is 23%, something like that, as according to Michael Kremer and Ted Miguel. Well, that's a fantastic investment, but no one wants deworming. The demand for deworming is about 0. So you're not going to make money by organizing a system of deworming kids in school. That's not happening, and yet it needs to be done. So someone needs to have supported the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 research in this case. So the stage 1 in this case was just, NIH, I think, National Institute of Health. Stage 2 was supported by a variety of donors. Stage 3 is helped by is now about getting policy makers to buy into the idea with support from a variety of sources, including USAID. So that's an example where there is no market, but there was some help, and we are now at a stage where many, many children are dewormed. So what I want to propose now is to give you an example of a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, which is an example of how it could work and how aid could be thought of that. So what I would like to see is both international organizations, bilateral organizations, stop to think of themselves as providing things. Stop to think of themselves in a sense as providing technical assistance. Which is, we know, you guys don't know, we're going to teach you. Because we don't know. You don't know either, by the way. So it's not that you have an informational advantage on us. I'm not my discourse doesn't have to be particularly politically correct. No one knows. So we're going to make an effort and find out together. We have some money that is more flexible than the type of money that you have, because we understand that your budget is tied in all sorts of, promises. We can use that money to kind of take some risk, agree to fail, move on to the next things that fail, scale up if that succeed. I think aid is uniquely poised to play this role if we are willing to change the mindset. It's a large mindset. It is not just like changing incentive of bureaucrats here and there. So I give you an example of how I think about it was a successful, I think relatively successful investment, example of this stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. It's about education quality. So the old MDGs had only targets for enrollment in basic primary schooling and equality between boys and girls, fine. And it's been very successful. I don't know if it's the fault of the MDG, because enrollment rates have increased rapidly, even in secondary school, which were not even part of the MDG. But it's only a glass half full story, because the learning levels have not followed suit. The learning level in developing countries have not really improved. If you look at recent years in India, as the number of kids going to school have increased, the learning levels of all children, not only of children in school, have decreased. And when I talk about learning level, I talk about recognizing, being able to read a paragraph that you should be able to read in grade 1. Between 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, it's actually going down. In India is an example. I don't want to pick on India. It's low generally in a lot of places. So the HLP, anyway, which is the report I've read in detail, recommends a focus on learning for the post-2015 agenda, and there is a lot of agreement that that should be the case. Learning is something we can measure with test scores, and it's something we may be able to achieve, but how? When you see that even a country like India, which is successful in many, many ways, don't manage to educate the vast majority of their children, thinking that might not be such an easy problem. So here is an example that kind of takes us several years back until today in trying to very deliberately work on this one issue. This is work that's been done jointly between a group of us, pre-JPAL and then through JPAL, and a wonderful organization in India called Pratham, which is a very large-scale organization serving about 30 million children with the goal of everyone in school and learning well. So many years ago, Pratham identified the need to focus on children who are lagging behind in school, so children who are enrolled but not doing well. So one of their first programs to address this problem was called the Balsaki problem. Balsaki means the child's friend, in urban, which at the time were in urban India, because they started in Bombay. So a low-paid employee came to the schools and pulled out children who were identified by teachers as lagging behind 2 hours per week and gave remedial classes. We got to know Pratham with Abhijit Banerjee early on, and we evaluated this program with a randomized controlled trial, so rigorously evaluated this program in 2 cities, Bombay and Baroda, and found very large increase in test scores. I put in brackets where the money came from, so that you can see where my idea of stage 1, stage 2, this came from the MacArthur Foundation. The money to do the work. This was nothing. Subsequently, I don't know, evaluations become more expensive, but I think it cost all of $50,000 to do that. And we found very large increase in test scores, particularly for children at the bottom of the distribution, so it seemed to be a good program. So there was still some issue with the program, in particular the fact that teachers tended to sometimes use the assistant to replace them and things like that. So the program evolved to become Read India, a program that focused on even more basic skills than the initial Balsaki program, and in fact at the beginning only reading, as the name indicates, and which was run either by volunteer or paid employee outside of the school, in camps. So a 4-month camp, rounding up all the children who can't read in the village, focusing on reading, ultimate focus on reading by young people, motivated, not necessarily super well trained. A team of us evaluated this program in Uttar Pradesh and found large effect of that program as well. So we're still in stage 1 because we're still tinkering with the model. International aid, again, this was funded by the World Bank. So that was a good thing. Here are the results. The results are all in terms of standard deviation of test scores, so you can kind of compare them from study to study. We found that for kids who did attend, if you focus on the second row here, for children who did attend the class, an improvement is 0.6 standard deviation in the assess score, which is a very basic reading level, which is a lot. But the overall effect in the village, in the treated village compared to control village, was only 1/10 of that because so few kids came to the camp. About 12% of the children actually attended the camp, or even about 10% of the children actually attended the camp. So the effect were large on those who attended and small. So the next natural idea is, okay, fine, we have a concept that kind of works. It's not difficult to teach kids to read if that's your entire focus. But then in order to scale it up, it has to go through the school system. If you're doing outside of the school system, you're going to be necessarily limited to how many kids you're going to find. So Pratham started to work with the government in every state in India that was willing to listen to them to train teachers to adopt this program. So this is the idea of stage 2 now. We kind of have a concept in mind. We need to modify it to make it policy ready, which is the equivalent of market ready for our sector. So we evaluated, so then it was launched and evaluated in Bihar in 2 versions. One version, which is in Bihar, was run exactly like in Uttar Pradesh, a volunteer outside the class, outside the school, running a 4-month camp. So it's really 3 versions. In Uttarakhand, the volunteers were in the school. And in both states, we had the teacher being trained, which was our idea of, can we take this mainstream? Here the funding came from the QEDC, which is Quality Education Development Consortium, which was a consortium that was funded by Hewlett Foundation and Gates Foundation. And the results are here, these are the results for Bihar, which gives you the average effect of being in a group. Again, this is estimated with a randomized control trial, so we compare villages that are otherwise exactly similar, but some of them received the model with volunteers, some of them received the model with teacher being trained, and some of them got just material. So you either just got the material, this was to test that it's not just giving the books that is sufficient, or you got material and the teacher were trained, or the teacher were trained, you get the material, and in addition you have volunteer. And the only thing that works, which you can see from the stars, even if you're not very used to regression tables, is the volunteer model. So we replicate the Uttarakhand, the UP result. That's that's reassuring. It would be a bit sad if that didn't replicate in another place. We replicate the UP result, but we don't manage to mainstream it. So that was kind of a failure from this point of view. So we use it to learn what happened. We had a lot of process evaluation going on and talked to everybody and qualitative reports. So the teachers really liked the teaching program. So it's not that they found it like a waste of time, but they really never implemented it in the classrooms. They were very poorly supported by school inspectors. When school inspectors came to the schools, all they had time to do is to verify that the money for the school lunch was not stolen. So that's what they continued to do. There was no sense from anybody that this was a priority. The teachers have very strong pressure to finish the curriculum, and so they didn't have time to do something else, so they continued following their curriculum, and that's it. So the question becomes, okay, are the teachers unable to own this curriculum? Do we need to go back and say this can't be scaled with the government, let's give up on governments, let's do something else? So there's one sign that it's not the case, which is in the Bihar case, the government also runs summer camps. And the summer camps were run by teachers, trained to run the summer camps, but in the summer, and they were only remedial summer camps. And the kids who were in the villages where the summer camps took place did better. And in particular, the ones who attended the summer camp, again, the summer camp is not compulsory, so not everybody came, but the one who attended the summer camp got gains in test scores that are quite comparable to the UP volunteer model. So it is possible for teachers to do it. What was different is that in the summer camp, that's all they had to do. That was they didn't have any competing demand. That's all they had to do. So the lessons we took from this Bihar and Uttarakhand Stage 2 evaluation is that the program works. You can replicate it in different contexts. It still works. But mainstreaming it through the government requires, of course, teachers to cooperate. They can do it. They're willing to do it. But they don't do it during the school year because there is too many pressures that they are facing and they can't move. So we need to try a new move, slightly move, tack, and do another stage 2 evaluation. We got a chance to do that with the government of Haryana, another Indian state, to be perfectly honest, because they wanted to test something else. We said, fine, we'll test your thing, but why don't we try this as well? And here we had two key changes, which were the product of what we had learned in the previous research. First one is that we exploit the fact that Haryana has introduced an extra hour in the school day, which was kind of still unclaimed. So we seized the extra hour. In the control school, they do whatever they want, but in the treatment school, the schools were told that you reorganize your school to be by level and not by class. And this is not about teaching the curriculum, which is appropriate to the class. This is about putting the teachers at the level at which they belong, which are remedial for some kids or advanced for some kids. So it's kind of reorganization for one hour a day. That's number one. That's to help the focus. And the second, to help the support, is to train a cadre of inspectors, they're called ABC, in the training and make them part and parcel of the project. Their job is to support and supervise the teachers and relay the message that this is a priority for the government to do it. So we try that. And this actually gives us, in terms of gain, average gains of test scores, same randomized evaluation, etc., blah, blah, rigmarole. And we find those results. This was an interesting moment because we had set up all the regression in advance. So when the data come, we press the button, this is what we found. And this is really exciting because this gives us a results that are bigger on average than the UP result because we have more kids, etc. coming. So finally, we have a system that works within the government system. So it took some time. What I want to insist on is that doesn't come like out of my hat. Well, it just doesn't come out of my hat whatsoever, since I didn't come up with the program in the first place, but it doesn't come out of Pratham's hat. It comes out of a lot of money, not that much with regard to the stake we are talking about, but a fair amount, and a lot of time. Many governments have come and gone while this happened. So stage 3, how do you move from this? So of course, Haryana is interested in scaling up, but where it's happening already is Bihar. So it started in one district where the collector became very interested in applying the the method that he kind of went to Haryana and he thought, okay, I can do that in my one district. And ultimately was adopted by the chief minister, Nitish Kumar, who's interested in doing things for Bihar, and the education secretary as a solution to very low learning levels in Bihar. And that effort is not led primarily by JPAL, although we come in here and there when needed. It's led by Pratham, support, and the GOB, government of Bihar, in collaboration with Pratham doing a lot of training of everybody, and of course the teachers are the government of Bihar. So that's kind of the example I wanted to go through. Just to summarize, to be relevant in the future, I think aid must become the venture capital that's lacking for development innovation. I'm not talking only about widgets, I'm talking about social policy. So that means facilitating basic research, replication research, which is sometimes harder, because you need people who are quite committed to go through the hassle of these large trials and successful scale-up of what has been tried up. That can help foster a culture of learning by governments by supporting their own learning efforts, as opposed to assuming that you're coming with some answers, we're going to teach you how to do things, or we're going to finance you to do things that at the time in our country we think is interesting in doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the two lectures. As presented before, I would like to invite now our both speakers to answer your questions, but also questions coming from the online audience. You also sitting here can ask questions not only to the microphone but also through Twitter. I saw that some of you are actually tweeting here using the hashtag KDL coming from the Kapuscinski Development Lecture. So hash KDL. My name is Jan Szczeciński. I'm representing the UN Development Program and managing these Kapuscinski Development Lectures initiative together with the European Commission and partner universities like here the Columbia University. Let me sit down. So there will be an no, does not sound. So okay, let's see. Yeah, how is it now? Is it going?
No.
No. Okay. Do we need to? Okay, just a second. When you can think of your questions, we also need even if I think the room is not so big, we need the mics also for the live streaming, so that people watching us live could listen to your questions and also the answers of our speakers. Yeah. Yeah, it works now. Yeah, it works now. Before we go to these questions, I have one question to Professor Ocampo and one question to Professor Duflo. And the major question now coming is how do you think realistically will look actually the post-2015 development agenda, based on what you know about the shortcomings, about the limitations that the decision makers also have, and to what extent do you think such research, scientific conclusions, like presented here now by Professor Duflo, could be applied in this process?
Well, let me say on the first part of the question that the process is really starting. So But again, I will point out that the past history shows that it is possible to agree on major goals in those UN settings. It's cumbersome, but as I say to my students, democracy is intensive in the use of time and in the use of words. Okay, so without a lot of time, negotiations, talking, you don't reach agreements. I mean, people think that it's a waste of time. It's actually not a waste of time, because it's the only way to reach agreements. And I think that's very valuable. That's how democracies work. And the UN, of course, is intensive in that, and I think that's an advantage, not a disadvantage. So I am actually optimistic. I mean, the real issue in the case of the current process is how the discussion of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is going to converge with this discussion of the post-2015. I mean, because there are sort of two different tracks. I mean, one way of understanding, for instance, people who are on top of the SDGs say that the concrete goals could be set in that framework, whereas let's say the framework, the broader vision, let's say, is what can come out of the post-2015 discussion that starts this year in the General Assembly. Now, I totally value the sort of innovations, and I find very interesting Professor Duflo's lecture today in terms of let's say, we sort of, I said in the beginning, we complement each other, because I guess I have always been concerned with the broader processes and agenda. I have also been in the practice of development, so I know how valuable these sort of ideas can be. So how to innovate and how to apply those innovations, I find very important there. Furthermore, I find quite interesting her emphasis today in government learning and what happened in the government learning. I think that's a very interesting process, because most areas of social policy, but also of economic policy, are in the realm of what governments do. And how you improve governments is, I think, essential in development.
Thank you very much. And if I may, my first question to Professor Duflo. I like particularly your statement on the need for the global development organizations to also be ready to take the risk and also to be ready to fail. To what extent you think the organizations, development agencies and policymakers are ready to take this approach?
I don't know. At the moment, the institutional framework is not in place, because everything, all the accountability systems are in. You have to show that you succeeded. So even if it has to take some creative accounting, you'll still show that you succeeded. And even if succeeding means delivering X amount of blah, and then blah turns out to not be particularly useful, that you'll succeed if that's what the incentive is. And so I think there is a need to for a shift, which is not only in the bureaucracies themselves that deliver the international development, but also among the ultimate bosses of these bureaucracies, which are parliaments and Congress and things like that.
And
the USAID is not going to admit that they've tried 10 things and 9 didn't work if, when they do that, Congress is coming to them and say, that's great, we are going to get your funding by 90% since you only succeed in 9. So I think it is a mindset shift, and whether or not it can be done, I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. Generally, I'm reasonably optimistic about most things. So, like, I think this at least, I don't think it's going to happen overnight, that 100% of aid is going to move from little programs here and there run by contractors in the case of USAID or budget support in the case of European Union to this kind of venture capital I have in mind. On the other hand, I think it would be a good start if in fact an excellent start, if some of the money, if even a small amount of money was set aside for this, leaving the business as usual to move along, and then we can see how that pans out, and then, you know, retract or expand depending on how that worked out. So I don't think it's something we have to do overnight. I realistically don't think it's going to ever happen that all of the aid money is used for that. Neither do I necessarily think it's worth it. I mean, this is even after we remove purely strategic monies, aid that's really spent here, and response to emergency situation, which I think are out, you know, are out of this and should stay out of that. But even if you keep the pure development funding, it's not going to be all of it. But I think if, you know, a little part of it, and then a little bigger part, and a little bigger part, and there I'm quite optimistic because there are movements in this direction very clearly. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Jim Kim wants the bank to be the World Bank to become a knowledge bank. How's that's going to happen without generating some knowledge? And the bank certainly has been at the forefront of doing a lot of experimental work with governments. USAID has now the Development Innovation Venture, which is very much thinking along the lines that was describing, you know, in the stage funding, etc., open to the world, and so that's an example of that. I think now there is Global Div, which is countries like the UK, I think Sweden, private foundation like Omidia are joining to expand the scope of Div. So there is a lot of movement going in this direction. So I think it's just a matter of pushing it along and seeing how far it goes.
And do you think the current starting processes Professor Ocampo mentioned of probably setting some goals for post-2015 periods is an opportunity to include this innovation in global development thinking and implementation?
So I think the goals themselves are about what the nations of the world collectively think are acceptable, minimum acceptable standard of living. They are less about ways to get there. So in a sense, I think we need those goals to have some agreement about what we are striving to collectively. And I think that would be helpful to then focus people's effort, including people's innovation effort. But it's a very essential conversation to be had, and in a sense the essential scaffolding for these things to take place. But it's a little bit orthogonal to them. Although one could imagine, in the context of, it can easily be attached to it, one could imagine in the context of the MDG to have funds that are specifically designed to support innovation that will help achieve some of the MDGs, that countries can access, that citizens in country can access, government, non-government actors, etc. Mm-hmm. So it can be, it creates a natural framework to anchor some of this potentially.
Okay, if we can open the floor for questions. Yes, please go ahead. If you could also introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Akbar Noman. I work here at Columbia University, teach at SIPA and Initiative of Policy Dialogue. We had very interesting presentations too, but very contrasting ones. Sorry, Professor Ocampo talked about the big picture stuff, the development, structural change, growth, inequality, and a whole set of other issues of that kind. And Professor Duflo focused on the micro interventions of a particular kind targeted at specific things. very glad to hear that Professor Ocampo called them complementary approaches, because they're often, they're seen as contradictory, conflicting. You do one or the other. But I'm very glad that that is the way in which to see it. Each approach has its role. And the question is, to what extent would, how would one prioritize? It's a very different, when you think about setting MDG agendas and how to go about achieving them, the question to some extent arises, what goals you set depends partly on what methods you adopt, depends partly on what goals you set. And the question, if there are issues of employment, structural change, growth, income growth, inequality issues, they require a very different set of instruments from delivering particular benefits, but like improving quality of education or delivering learning and so forth. And it's getting that mix right, which is actually which is the tricky part, and it's a complementary part of it. Now the question is, to Professor Duflo, is how do you see the relationship between these two approaches? And Professor Carr, they're complementary approaches, they have different ways of doing things, and how does one reconcile these approaches, or does one need to reconcile the approaches? Can we walk on both legs, so to speak?
Okay. Well, I think my basic point, I mean, you can have goals of education, but my basic point is that those goals of education have to have the big picture, first of all, of how to reduce international inequalities and how to reduce, for example, domestic inequalities, which I think are overarching objectives. And whether you take them or not is important. For example, take the issue. I mean, long-term controversies on some of these questions. For example, do you design policies that targets the specific, target the specifically the poor, or do you design universal policies? For example, in relation to Latin America, the World Bank was a big promoter of targeted policies. Now it is becoming a promoter of universal policies, which is the view that, for example, those in the United Nations always defended. That you have to start with universal policies and then design what are targeted instruments within universal policies. Actually, just to take Professor Duflo's presentation today, that's how I see it. I mean, you have the universal policy of improving the quality of education. Okay, that's a universal policy. It applies to all kids, and then you within that global universal policy, then you adopt very specific instruments to guarantee that it takes place. By focusing then on the specific children that are lagging behind. So that's now. On the other hand, say I was concerned with the institutional design of the policy framework. Let's say, and well, without those policy frameworks, I think you cannot. I mean, the specific targets become meaningless. You have to set put them into a framework of a development policy. But you have to have instruments of implementation. I mean, how you actually do things. And I think that there are two different, that's why I think this is totally complementary, because, I mean, the instrument, I mean, the sort of the strategy that Professor Duflo saw, but, or her view of aid as venture capital, let's say, is one framework of how to design, how do you do innovations in public policy, let's say, and how you consolidate that. I think that's a very, for me, it's a complementary set of ideas.
Yeah, I think I somewhat fail to see the contrast between big and small. So I don't understand what's big and what's small. If you deworm kids I think deworming is almost the archetypal example of a small thing. But if you deworm kids for 1 year more, they make 23% more money for every year of their adult life. That's more, I think, that there is no mix of macroeconomic policy that someone has successfully shown to have that effect. So I don't really, so in that sense, it's a small policy, but the effects are larger than the big policies. So that on the one hand. On the other hand, the big policies, you said, oh, well, that's different instruments will need to be applied for employment. I'm not very sure. Like how, it was mentioned at the beginning rightly, Europe is struggling with employment policies for decades. Like, the latest fashion was to subcontract placement services to private agencies because that was going to work. I don't know if that's a big policy or a small policy, but certainly a policy you can evaluate. Turns out that doesn't think it works. I mean, we've done some research showing it doesn't work. So the same type of, in fact, there is a lot of work on labor market policies in using, I think, maybe small, this kind of small approach in rich and in poor countries, and this is the question of youth employment and skilling people to labor market in both developing countries and middle-income countries has become, like it already has been in rich countries for a while, a central core issue, and one it's a policy question. It's a question of policy design. Same type of instrument you use to think about schools, you can think about those questions. It applies broader than that. Institutions, I agree, are absolutely, set the framework for all of this work. But not only institution with capital I, but also the detail in the rules of the functioning of this institution. So once you've said democracy, you've said very little until you know who can vote and how they can vote and what are the voter ID law and what are the electronic machine and how do you ensure that the illiterate people can vote and their votes are counted and this and that. It's a series of rather small things. They have to be looked at, otherwise the big things don't mean much. So usually the big things, when you start looking at them, fractally turns into a series of quite small things, and that's why I think the contrast is less vivid in practice for anybody who actually work in the sector and work with governments on a day-to-day basis. Then it might seem from a little bit removed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. There is the microphone, in the middle. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Andres Escano. Thank you both for the presentation. Madame Duflo, I'm curious about how you think the selection mechanism would be working. I mean, in the venture capital industry, there's a financial reward that ensures that there's a due diligence when people are evaluating the ventures, and that also makes the money go to the right projects. How do you see that working in this case?
So what replaces that for this sector is rigorous evaluation, because you don't have the market test for a lot of things, because the poor are going to the schools that the government is offer them until they become so bad that they leave, but we try not to reach that point. You don't have market test, people are not going to walk away, and so you need a replacement for that, and the replacement for that is rigorous scientific evaluation, which in my mind means randomized control trials for the most part. So that's why in the business world, evaluation helps along the way, but it's not critical to the success of venture capital, because eventually if your widget doesn't sell, that's a bad widget, because your objective is to sell. Whereas here we don't have that automatic market test, which is why the venture capital doesn't emerge in the first place, which is why we need to replace it by evaluations. So that requires an agreement of what constitutes good science, and different, slightly different institutional structures to ensure, the respect of those processes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to hear you speak, and I really appreciate your work, and it's really important as a development practitioner and as a professor to have you in the field, so thank you. Quick question following up on the previous question, which is, can you talk a little bit about the cases where RCTs are just not ideal? And in particular, I think one thing that we're noticing, particularly with the DIV initiative, is that most of the ideas that are in the pipeline right now in all three stages are coming from 2 or 3 of the same organizations with the same knowledge background of highly trained academics with great educations from Western universities. So if we're going to expand the knowledge base and understanding what works in policy, how do we open up the field to get the ideas, if even experiments, in developing countries open? And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you, first of all, trickle up this knowledge of learning that you have been doing to a larger degree, and then how do we get better at detecting and then eliciting the types of potential experiments out of sort of an elite group into more of a inclusive kind of participatory process of getting these things, and then also the question of where RCTs don't apply. Thanks.
So there are 2 distinct questions as I see it. One is when RCTs are not really the right way to approach a problem, or will never be, in a sense. And I think where there is a key limitation is when it's going to take a very long time to see effects. So RCTs are not good for looking at a very long run effect of historical event, institutional changes, and that kind of stuff, or of course macroeconomic policy like the exchange rate policy. So although I'm always amazed by how creative people become in trying to look at this and that, but I think that those are limits to where it's going to be hit. And then we have to replace that by thinking about other things, other methods. Now, for the second question, which I see a second question is how do you broaden, this requires many people to do the work. So I think the 2 organizations you have in mind, I think one of them I can identify probably what it is, are both in a sense have in terms of enormous reach in terms of who they're talking to. So that's kind of, and I think that's probably the fact that you need that intermediation is as much, at least, a feature of how difficult it is to interact with an organization like USAID and to write a proposal and to do all of that, than the process of doing an RCT. In fact, a huge success of DIV, I think, is the opening beyond the traditional people who apply to USAID. That most of the people who apply to USAID are the same old chemonics, whatever, Beltway bandits, and the openness of DIV has managed to bring new people, but not enough. So how do we address that? There is not enough capacity, but partly it's a matter of time, but partly it's a matter of creating the capacity, which means training young people, sending them to good schools everywhere, which means something that we try to do a lot of is training people at all levels of organization in things that are not particularly RCTs, but monitoring, data collection, why it's useful, being good consumers of this kind of work, and it's kind of, and then working with governments so that they also become familiar with this kind of stuff. We, as more people do this kind of work, since it's labor intensive, which is a good thing, because you get a lot of people who work on the project who then go on and do other things, and so I think it's kind of snowballing like that progressively. Occasionally, I'm like you and become very impatient, and I think, how can we accelerate that process? And I think about training institutes, like, you know, that would be somewhere in the developing countries that would actually take in a large intake of people who could do this work and train them enough. And it's not rocket science. That's the good news. It's really not. It's really not nuclear physics. It can be. It's not. It can be taught, not in 1 week, but certainly in a couple of years, pretty much to anybody. And I hope that something like that emerges, and I think it's possible. When there is demand and supply, will match up. It's going to happen, I think, progressively. I think the more and more NGOs become educated, and more importantly, more and more governments become educated. And as they become educated in the need of doing these things, they're not necessarily able to do it themselves, but at least they're good consumers. And then they become demanding in terms of what they're looking. People are going to fill in the gap. And now you see, you know, even the profit motive will set in to do this evaluation work if there is money to do it. So it could become a market. And if Chemonics has to learn to do rigorous evaluation to stay in business, they will.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Professor Ocampo wanted to.
Let me make a couple of points on evaluation. You know, the first one is that fashions are dangerous. Okay, and I put this very clearly. I remember in a meeting on actually the evaluation systems, the minister from Ecuador, I remember pointed out, you know, I hope, you know, she said, I hope the World Bank will start to evaluate other things except, you know, aside from conditional cash transfers in Latin America. Because there are many other programs that we have that have not been evaluated, and they're fashions. So the fashion, you know, the fashions are really dangerous. And I must say that's probably correct also of techniques of evaluation. So you have to, you know, avoid, because not all techniques are useful for other purposes. You know, having had the task of putting in place an evaluation system in the government for a development plan, I said that there are many levels of evaluation that you have to put in place. I mean, to start with, you have to, you know, the general evaluation of policies. That is done by, you know, totally different techniques. For example, a second level, which is very important in practice, is whether, you know, ministries and agencies execute the funding that you give them. I mean, one of the main problems in many countries is that the execution process is extremely cumbersome. That has to do with many other things, you know, bureaucratic obstacles of different character that, you know, you have to solve. Again, you have to see how you manage that. You know, and then of course, you know, going further, you know, you have the you know, evaluation of, you know, concrete programs, or in the case Professor Duflo was saying, is innovations. So the evaluation system our government has to put in place is a complex one. It's you know, has to do different dimensions of how, you know, you go from a government policy to a specific action and results. And for each level, you probably have different methods of evaluation. And even for the last level, you know, you probably have different methods of evaluation. I mean, you know, in other contexts, you use more traditional techniques of evaluation. And actually, one technique which I find is in practice very effective is actually consulting with the people. Actually, you know, consultations with the people about how people, you know, react on a specific government program, on how it is good and how it is bad, is sometimes one of the best evaluation systems, you know, from experience. Okay.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Lim. I'm a first-year master's candidate here at SIPA. Thank you to Professor Ocampo and Professor Duflo for speaking. Oops. Oh. Sorry. Thank you both for speaking to us tonight. So one of my questions is that in the example that you showed us in the India reading case, is it normal for funders to change? In each phase, you had a different funder. And then in that case, is there a chance, or have you had an experience where the new funder wants to change the parameters of the trial, and then you have to convince them, oh, we have to stick to the original parameters or else the results will be affected? And then the second question is that you mentioned good consumers, that, that the government hopefully becomes a good consumer of data. Is it right to assume that it's much harder to sell like a statistical data instead of a snappy soundbite, and it's harder for them to like digest this kind of information? And have you had like interesting experiences when they've had like unusual reactions to the regression data that you're giving to them? Thank you.
On the first question, it's pretty common precisely because there is not one structure which is equipped to do that, except perhaps DIV, which appeared way after this was funded. This was done. So now you kind of move from one place to another because it's, you know, people have some people have little pots of money and some people are larger pots of money. So you have to be a bit entrepreneurial in the funding. In this case, there was really no every time there was a lot of awareness of what was done before and a lot of desire to build on it by both anybody, everybody present, Pratham, the government's partner, the funding, and the research team. So there was no issue. On the discussing the statistical results, actually I found it remarkably easy. And I think that's an advantage of these evaluation methods. It's quite transparent. The results are what they are. In the case of Haryana, I didn't discuss the program that they wanted us to evaluate, which was a miserable failure. And I don't think they were happy that it didn't work out, but they never discussed the value of the result because it was, it was what it was, and then they took it as, okay, where do we go from then? They don't want to abandon their program, but they want to change it. All the power to them. But the things are so clear that at least then you can have the conversation on what do we go next, as opposed to I don't believe your assumption. And you don't need a lot of statistics to compare means, and essentially that's all it takes. So it takes, the machinery behind it takes a lot of, care, but then the final product is transparent and easy to communicate, which I think is I found this to be very, very helpful. And I work more and more with governments, almost only with governments now, and I've always found quite good constructive reaction, whatever the results happen to be, for good results and bad results of our government's partner, with some effort to understand what happened and never an attempt to suppress the result or what have you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we can take one more question. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Rebeca Moreno. I'm first year Public Administration, Economic and Political Development concentration. And my question was more or less to both of you. Thank you for your lectures, by the way. The first is the governance indicators that Professor Ocampo mentioned. I was wondering if you have any insights of the measurement, because I totally agree with you that the World Bank governance indicators are not a good measure because they're based on national perception surveys, and this is a bad benchmark, actually. So I don't know if you can share us the task force ideas about how to measure governance indicators and what are good governance indicators, and maybe Professor Duflo, how can we measure this at the micro-national level, like in the trial and error social policy perspective? Thank you.
So maybe I'll go first because it will be very quick. I totally share his Professor Ocampo's skepticism there in terms of what good governance is like it's in the eyes of the beholders in a way that makes it quite which makes it very tricky as an objective. I think it was a very important political thing to have given who was leading the panel, but I don't think we have good indicators. Unfortunately, I don't have one to propose to you, except at the end results, you know. So in a sense, governance per se is to achieve something. And so if we suppose we had teacher absence, it's not a governance thing, it's a small thing, I think. It counts as small things. On the other hand, I think that's a result of a system that works. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good idea of how to better measure. I mean, the basic problem with most governance measures is that they are based on opinions of selected groups. And they are not based on objective measurements of any sort. And that's the. Furthermore, I think the hard test. I know that economists like to put this on political scientists and regressions and get results of different kinds, which I'm always skeptical of anyway. But let me say that the best analysis I've seen of this was actually one of these reports of the World Bank to follow the MDGs, which are the global monitoring reports, and one of the first reports actually analyze how the World Bank governance indicators help to, to explain any differences in result across countries. And they finally came to the conclusion that at best, they seem to differentiate three groups of countries in terms of performance. So I don't, I don't think it's a useless exercise. I think measuring everything, to the extent that it's measurable, should be done and tried and see what works and how to improve that measurement. The problem is I may share like them some measurements. For example, some measures on corruption. I actually like that they are published and widely used and pinpoint that. Those governments that, according to those measures, are corrupt, or more corrupt than others. I just think that it's totally impossible to agree, even on those indicators that I like, at the level of the United Nations, because it's impossible to agree that that's an objective measure that you should use. And this is probably on the issue of corruption, which they probably, you can, probably reach agreement that that's a major governance objective, how to reduce corruption. I think so. I mean, certainly, probably we can reach consensus. But then how to measure is, it's a very, very difficult issue. There are probably even forms of corruption that are not called corruption. For instance, lobbying. Isn't lobbying a form of corruption? When it actually can be a much worse form of corruption, because it can lead to legal norms that favor some groups over others. I personally think that's part of corruption that should be included in a correct a measure of corruption. I don't know anyone that does that. So I don't think in the UN you have at the end have to agree not only on the objectives, and you probably reducing of corruption can be an objective that can be agreed among UN member states, but then the specific indicator and target is difficult to measure. For example, we have been criticized, my committee and my views on inequality. There are actually quite well-known measures of inequality that you can use not only to have the goal, but the target and the indicator to measure that, whether you are achieving that target. Actually, I have here a memo that two Columbia University professors presented to the Deputy Secretary General, which are Professor Michael Doyle from SIPA and Professor Joseph Stiglitz, about, which they have the goal, the targets, and the indicator. Of how to, what can be done to reduce extreme inequality. So that's a particular case, because I've been criticized for this memo that is being distributed today, that we propose something that is not measurable, and cannot be followed by a system. I think it's possible. That's one concrete case in which you can measure. I don't see that in, for example, even in areas of corruption, which I That's one of the worst forms of malfunctioning of governance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our speakers. And I hope the conclusions from this event, from both lectures, could be somehow adopted or at least discussed by the world leaders gathering this week in New York for the UN General Assembly high-level meeting, including the analysis of the high-level panel report by Professor Ocampo, but also the recommendation for the heads of states, heads of governments, heads of development agencies, from Professor Duflo to be brave and focus on innovation, tests, and maybe even be brave enough to fail. I hope this could be passed as a message to the world leaders gathering this week in New York. I'd like to thank the Columbia University for hosting this event, and the European Commission, and particularly Commissioner Peebles for being here and co-organizing the event, and would like to invite all of you to the reception. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, that's a very nice meeting you in person. It was a great pleasure. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay. What do you think? Not realistic?
Not realistic. The European Union. I graduated more than 10 years ago. I really enjoyed your lecture.
Okay, I hear you very much.
I don't know what's that, but okay. The question is if okay. I'd like to do like a 5-minute. I don't know, is that an hour or?
Can you give me like 5 minutes?
Yeah, and I'll set up the.
Los volcanes